CNN's Brian Stelter is getting shredded on Twitter because he doesn't seem to understand how the United States is supposed to work. But this story is actually much more fascinating because we can see the perfect hypocrisy of CNN. You see, Brian Stelter comes out, and there's actually two things here, and says, according to this story, administration officials have a political interest in having the states run the show, and then says, let that quote sink in. He later tries to deflect, saying, I didn't actually say anything. It's just a quote from a story, except he said, let that quote sink in. We know what he was trying to imply. And it actually wasn't a direct quote from the officials. It was a quote from the story. So I'm not sure that matters all that much. We'll read this. But another funny thing happened because a day later, CNN runs the story that Trump wants to reopen the economy, but the governors must decide. So which is it? Trump's secret plot to put the onus on governors to absolve himself of responsibility into what's going on? Or is it that the governors actually are in charge? So this gets funnier because then Trump tweeted shortly after, and CNN, yes, of course, they're outraged, saying, no, I can reopen the economy if I want. There's two different things here. We'll break it down. Yes, Trump can reopen the economy if he wants. It's my understanding under certain... It probably won't be exactly the same as if the governors did it, but there are certain ways you can probably get around it. But yes, the governors do have substantial control over how their state functions, and Trump is probably wrong about this one. But we will dive into that. Let's just get started first with the roasting of Brian Stelter. Now, here's the thing. The reason I'm doing this is because Brian Stelter tweeted out a loaded statement telling people to let it sink in, clearly with some kind of anti-Trump political commentary. That's what it means. We know what it means. And then tried passing it off. So no, you don't get a freebie on this one. Town Hall says, CNN's Brian Stelter made waves over the weekend when he tweeted a critique of President Trump that seemed to show a lack of comprehension about how the United States government was designed. Quote, admin officials say the White House has made a deliberate political calculation that it will better serve Trump's interest to put the onus on governors rather than the federal government to figure out how to move ahead. Let that quote sink in, Stelter wrote Friday. The veteran anchor and host of Reliable Sources, a show created ostensibly as a fact checker for other media sources, shared his thoughts as a quote from unidentified quote admin officials, but was quickly corrected online. Yes, here's what Molly Hemingway said. Yes, the U.S. Constitution is a 100-year-long plot to help Trump win re-election. Excellent take, said Molly Hemingway. Also, it's not a quote, but an unsupported assertion based on reporters' dubious and unverifiable interpretation of what they claim anonymous sources told them. Oh, I love it. This is the toilet flow regurgitation of quotes from random people we don't know, then gets passed off as a direct quote. You know what, man? They have no idea what they're talking about. Stelter's tweet linked to an article from the Washington Post, which was also critical of Trump's handling of the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic, but chided what they perceived as the president's lack of a plan, not his yielding power to state and local government. The quote, which Stelter clearly attributed to admin officials, was actually a quote from the authors of the Washington Post, which said, administration officials speaking on the condition of anonymity to describe internal deliberations say the White House has made a deliberate political calculation that it will better serve Trump's interest to put the onus on governors rather than the federal government to figure out how to move ahead. Emphasis added. So what they added the emphasis. Now, I think it is fair to say the gist of what the admin officials were trying to get across is what Brian Stelter was tweeting, and it's Twitter's shorthand. So I'm not going to blame him for that necessarily. They say the article did not offer any critique of the president for tapping governors and local legislators to choose their own regulations and assess the risks to local communities. Leaving power with the local elected officials is a tenet of federalism and was carefully designed by the founding fathers to avoid overreach and power grabs from the federal government. So here we have one person saying, let's start at the beginning. There was this guy named James Madison who went to Philadelphia and had an idea for a national government. But there were also small states with different ideas. So here we have Beth Bauman saying, say it with me, Brian, Constitution. Alexa, define United States. Stop. Don't. I have one. It's going to start talking to me. Alexa, stop. There we go. No, it turned on. Stop. I hate these things. There we go. It stopped. Neon Taser says, wow, states looking at specific situation and tailoring policy to the jurisdictions. Madness. This person says, holy crap, you have no idea what federalism is. All right, so here's the tweet from Brian Stelter. And here's what he said. Admin officials say the White House, blah, blah, blah. Here's the line. Let that quote sink in. Brian Stelter then thought it'd be appropriate to retweet some criticism of him and try and pass off the criticism. Check this out. So he actually retweeted this guy. This is straight up the dumbest thing Brian Stelter has said during this pandemic, and there's been some doozies. So Trump is encouraging the basic model of how our government is supposed to function. How dare he? To which Brian Stelter replied, it's a quote from the New York Times, so you should probably take out your anger on them. First of all, it's not a quote from the New York Times. It's a quote from the Washington Post, Brian. Second of all, wait, is your tweet written by someone at the New York Times? I don't know what you're trying to say, but more importantly, I put in quotes, let that quote sink in. You see, there's some people that we know and expect to say, let that sink in, notably Paul Joseph Watson and Charlie Kirk. And we understand what let that quote sink in is supposed to mean. It's supposed to mean it's something serious and bad and whoa, consider what this means. I don't know what Brian Stelter was trying to get across by claiming that the New York Times quoted that when it was actually the Washington Post, I guess. I mean, as far as I can tell, it's a quote from the Washington Post, right? That's what they say. Look, it was from the Washington Post article. So, I'll put it this way. If Brian's wrong about who quoted this, I don't understand why he tweeted a link to a Washington Post story, which we can clearly see. So, yes, Donald Trump wants the governors and local governments to run this show on their own. Something interesting then happens. Take a look at this. Oliver Darcy tweeted, Chiron on CNN earlier this hour, Trump wants to reopen economy, but governors will decide. What? Which is it? Trump has got a nefarious plot for re-election, or the governors have ultimate authority? I can't tell you. Look, Trump jumped in on this one. Here's what Trump tweeted. For the purpose of creating conflict and confusion, some in the fake news media are saying that it is the governor's decision to open up the states, not that of the president of the United States and the federal government. Let it be fully understood this is incorrect. It is the decision of the president, and for many good reasons. With that being said, the administration and I are working closely with the governors, and this will continue. A decision by me in conjunction with the governors and input from others will be made shortly. I believe Trump is absolutely incorrect. I think the states can basically do what they want. Now, I understand. You're going to hear from a lot of people tell you he's right, he's wrong. No, ultimately, I think the first assessment was correct when everyone was pointing out that the states ultimately will control their local's jurisdiction. Case in point, two big stories. In California, you have the sanctuary state thing going on, where they're ordering their local law enforcement not to comply with ICE and CBP and certain federal regulations. They're doing it. You've also had California legalize recreational and medicinal marijuana, and the federal government came in. So there's clashes, right? The federal government does have authority to go in states and do these things, but the states also have the authority to do what they want as well. Trump wants the governors to do it, but says he has the power to reopen things. I think Trump is wrong. I absolutely do. You can also look at Virginia and see how they're doing Second Amendment sanctuary counties, where many areas of the state have declared that they will not be enforcing some of these new restrictions and regulations. I believe Trump, for the most part, is, well, it's tough. Trump is wrong, for sure. Of course, the media will claim Trump is lying about what's happening. Okay, CNN, first, trying to play it both ways. And I think it's weird that Trump is coming out and saying this. But what I think ultimately that Trump is saying, if he really wanted to, there's ways he could force the states to reopen. The states can reopen if they want. The states can close if they want. The federal government can come in and look. When California tried setting up their dispensaries, the DEA came in and started raiding a bunch of these shops. Ultimately, the federal government can come in and do these things and make these changes. It's complicated, to say the least. But what I love about this story, and there's more, because I'm not going to leave it there. What I love about this story is how it starts with Trump saying the governors are going to have to do this. The onus is on the governors. And Brian Stelter saying, let that sink in. Was Brian fact-checked by his own news outlet being wrong? Look, I get it. Trump is wrong often. He's right often as well. Sometimes he says things that are not true. You want to call it a lie? You want to call it misinformation? I don't care what you call it. But here's CNN starting the whole debacle, saying that simultaneously the onus on governors is a Trump plot. But then coming out and saying, nope, Trump can't reopen the economy if he wants to. This is evidence of the orange man bad narrative. It's the system design at CNN. It's the only thing they know how to do. If Trump says it, it must be wrong. What Oliver Darcy must be pointing out here is that Donald Trump was probably watching CNN, I suppose. But I'm now going to show you something about CNN just because I feel like showing it, and it's kind of gross. You're being warned right now. It has to do with a CNN show, their desperation. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that recently on the Joe Rogan podcast, he was talking with someone about objectivity. And he said CNN was trying to survive. It's why they do the things they do. Case in point, Brian Stelter saying Trump, let that sink in, wants to make the governors take responsibility. But then CNN later reports that the governors are the ones who have to do it. Both can't be true. Pick one. CNN is just trying to survive. Joe was correct. Now that you've been warned, I hope you're ready for this next article, because some of you might not like it. It has to do with eating human. So you're being warned again. Here we go. This is a story from several years ago, March 6, 2017. Reza Aslan, host of CNN's Believer, catches grief for showcasing religious cannibals in India. The reason I'm highlighting this story from a long time ago, it's a couple of reasons. Reza Aslan has been a very, very vocal, woke, nasty person on Twitter. Is my personal belief that after this moment, it really destroyed his psyche. I think, CNN trying to survive, trying to figure out how to navigate this territory, ultimately did a segment, and they aired the segment. It's the craziest thing, where Reza Aslan eats human. He eats human. I'm not exaggerating. Literally sitting down with these people, they give him a piece of human brain and he eats it. He could have gotten up at any point and walked away. He did it. And he later was making jokes on Twitter and Facebook about it. Yeah, they were desperate. It was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. That is not how you make content. See, at the time, this is back in 2017. The show was probably filmed several months before that. Vice was the cream of the crop, the golden child of new media. And everyone wanted to be edgy and make these edgy documentaries. Vice on HBO was doing really well, won some Emmys. I believe CNN was chasing after this. So what they end up doing is getting this guy Reza, and they say, we're going to do a bunch. They did a series of travel docs. They need to figure it out because, clearly just running news 24/7 wasn't working. And they said, go for this. So he did. And it's the crazy thing about this. CNN aired this in the show. Reza Aslan only ran away after, according to the Washington Post, the cannibals started throwing their waste at him. He could have ran away before eating the human meat, but he chose to. This is how extreme CNN is. Now listen, there is a specific reason I'm bringing this up. Bear with me, and I do have more for you. When you see what CNN is willing to do, how far they're willing to go to survive, literally depict someone eating human meat because they think it's edgy and it'll get them a lot of traffic. It certainly got him traffic, destroyed this guy's life as far as I can tell. I mean, he's on Twitter and he is messed up. I think that, look, when you see the politics, when you see the wishy-washy double standard, when CNN contradicts itself consistently, it sounds like, some people, well, let me put it this way. Some people just, they don't know, right? It's reasonable when you see Brian Stelter say, Trump is trying to put the onus on governors. He's trying to skirt his responsibility. You hear that and you're like, oh, wow, is Trump really doing that? And then a day later, they report the governors are the ones who have to decide, which contradicts what they previously claimed. Granted, Brian Stelter is an individual, CNN is a network. I get it, to be fair. But when you show them this, what Brian Stelter is doing and what these other journalists, well, I'll use air quote, activists at CNN, whatever you want to call them, what they're doing is the equivalent of eating brain on TV. When you see the brain eating, you know it's insane. You see the desperation. You're like, wow, they must be nuts. What CNN has done since then is they've stopped doing this kind of travel, this kind of field reporting. And now it's panel after panel about Orange Man bad. Go to my Instagram. Go to Instagram.com/Timcast. Take a look at the post. You have to scroll down. You'll find it. And I did this thing where I do this all the time with my friends. I'll put on Fox News and they'll be talking about some news event. And in this particular instance, they're like protests in Hong Kong, protests in Iran. You switch to CNN. What do you get? Well, Donald Trump and the impeachment. I wait a week. I do it again. Fox News is talking about severe weather is impacting the country. You switch to CNN. Well, the impeachment of Donald Trump. Scandal, scandal, scandal. It's all they do. CNN is completely desperate. And so they've started doing this nonsensical trash. But there's another factor in the fake news that we will now get to. And you see, I'm actually happy to show you this next bit. The other day, the New York Times ran a puff piece protecting Joe Biden because he has been credibly accused by a woman. To start off, of course, I don't much care for 30-year-old allegations. I'm not interested in entertaining them. I'm sorry, Tara Reid. I'm not trying to say this to be disrespectful to you or anyone else. But you can't come out 30 years later, 27 years to be fair, and say, these things happen. I'm filing a criminal report. especially in an election cycle. I'm not a fan of it. Sorry, what's Biden supposed to do? However, we can now see Ben Smith of the New York Times, formerly of BuzzFeed, tweeting, I'm hoping to do a Q&A with Times editors later about the Biden-Tara Reade story. What should I ask? I know, rip my replies. John Levine of the New York Post says, I'd love to know more about the inclusion and later deletion of the last portion of this tweet, and specifically who made the call and was the New York Times contacted by the Biden campaign. You see, the New York Times actually corroborated the statement made by Tara Reade. I mean, this is actually better than, it's substantially more credible than what we saw with Brett Kavanaugh. The New York Times downplayed the whole thing. Check this out. Let me show you this tweet from Wesley Lowery. Wesley Lowery, I believe, is with the Washington Post. He's a correspondent for 60 Minutes right now. And he used to be with the Washington Post. He's still wrapping up. He said he wants to know about the placement, deadpan, of the line about filing a false police report is punishable by. Seems a little odd. Gave the suggestion, the reporters believe there was reason to consider Reade's report false. WAPO did this too. What was the thinking discussion around that? You see, they arbitrarily included this sentence in the New York Times piece that said filing a false police report is punishable, and they linked to the statute. Why? What did that have to do at all with the story? The reason I'm bringing this up, you can see CNN is chasing after desperation. They're desperate. They're chasing after ratings and money because they're collapsing. The New York Times, on the other hand, with the subscription model, is chasing after politics. Joe Biden has been credibly accused. The accusation is substantially more credible, according to the New York Times' own reporting, than the accusations against Brett Kavanaugh. But when it came to Kavanaugh, the New York Times wrote, several dozen stories entertaining the possibility of Kavanaugh being a bad person or an abuser. Joe Biden has been credibly accused with a criminal charge filed. And here's what the New York Times reported. What we see from John Levine, they said, we found no pattern of misconduct by Biden beyond hugs, kissing, and touching. Yes, okay, we get it. He's an abuser. But you found nothing else? They deleted that section. However, they say they found no pattern, even though there is a pattern. And later on in the story, Tara Reade says that after she filed a complaint, she was abruptly removed from her position. The New York Times corroborated this by talking to other staffers who said they didn't know anything about the allegation, but they do know that abruptly Tara Reade was removed from supervisory roles. She was no longer supervising them, corroborating a claim made by Tara Reade. Does that prove she's right? No, because for all we know, she got her duties reduced because she threw a pie in someone's face. I have no idea, but this is what she said. The New York Times found corroborating evidence to her story. Well, you can't just outright dismiss that the way they did, and they did dismiss it. The good news is, for now, we have Ben Smith actually going to talk to them about it. I don't think they're going to get away with this. Reporters from many other outlets are calling this out, including a former Washington Post reporter, a New York Post reporter. Granted, that's the Washington Post left, to the left, and New York Post to the right. People are rightfully calling out this very obvious double standard. We are seeing it from activists, but the point is, I don't want to get into the activist stuff, the media. So here you go. The media may actually be forced the New York Times may be forced to actually reconcile with this fake news they've pumped out. Meanwhile, you can see what CNN is trying to do. It's all about desperation. The motivations from the New York Times seem to be clearly political. In fact, one other journalist asks, why, let me see if I can find it. This guy, Alex Lawson, let's see who he is. He's an international trade reporter for Law 360, said, why was this story assigned to the political team rather than the very accomplished investigative reporters who have worked on high-profile misconduct stories? Bingo. The New York Times didn't even give this to the investigative team? The political team? Yeah, activists. Desperation. Two different kinds. The New York Times, we gotta make sure Trump loses. And CNN, probably a little bit of that too, but also we will do whatever it takes to get paid, including airing footage of a human eating human. Reza Aslan could have walked away from that whenever he wanted. He ran away when they threw their waste at him. He could have ran away when they tried to get him to eat brain. But they were so desperate for ratings that they rolled with it. How insane are these people? Let me just finish that thought. Stop here and say, CNN ate human brain. This is a guy for CNN on their show eating human on TV. I'm never going to let them live that down. Also, honorable mention. Remember when Don Lemon asked whether or not a black hole could have swallowed an airplane? And then his guest said, even a small black hole would swallow the whole universe. No, it won't. CNN, you garbage. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.